She'd grown up learning how to be low maintenance. She was the good kid, the one who didn't throw tantrums, didn't demand the new phone or the fancy trip or the expensive dress. Maybe it was because, even as a child, her body felt a little more fragile than everyone else's. The condition wasn't dramatic enough to make her a priority, just enough to be a problem they could conveniently ignore when it suited them. Her mother liked to remind her that the doctors had said the surgery could wait. That it wasn't life or death. That someday, when they had enough tucked away, they'd fix it and she'd be good as new. They talked about it like patching up a leaky roof. It was never the right time, but someday they'd handle it. She learned not to bring it up. Not when her sister needed braces, not when her father's car died, not when the refrigerator gave out the week before Christmas. Her needs always slid to the back of the line. By the time she hit her 20s, she'd become an expert at managing her own body's demands. She ate carefully, avoided certain activities, saved what she could from her part-time work just in case the day came when her parents' fund fell short. But whenever she asked about it, her mother would say, "It's all there. We've got your surgery money safe. You just focus on getting through school." So she did. She studied, she worked, she tried to be the least burden possible. And it was almost enough to let her believe them, until her sister's engagement came around like a parade she hadn't bought a ticket for. Her sister had always been the princess, the one with big parties and bigger expectations. The wedding was exactly what everyone expected, a lavish blur of dress fittings, venue deposits, catering tastings, and weekend trips to pick out floral arrangements. When she asked once, just once, if maybe they should stick to a tighter budget so the surgery fund stayed untouched, her mother looked at her like she'd grown horns. This is her special moment. Don't be negative. We've got it under control. But she knew how numbers worked. She saw the credit card bills left open on the kitchen table. She heard the late-night whisper fights in the hallway when her father said they couldn't cover it all. She heard her name once. "Well, we could pull from her account for now. She won't need it right away. We'll put it back." Her mother shushed him, but the words stuck. On the wedding day, she pushed it out of her mind. She stood in the photos, painted on her polite smile, clapped when they cut the cake. She told herself maybe she was imagining things, that they'd never do that to her. Not really. But then came the honeymoon. An all-inclusive resort on an island her sister had picked out the same way she picked out expensive shoes. "If you love me, you'll make it happen." She pretended not to notice when the bags were packed. She pretended not to notice when her father left the travel confirmation on the printer tray, her surgery fund's name clearly marked on the account that paid for it. She wanted to confront them right then. To scream that they'd promised, that she'd done everything right, that she'd held up her end of the bargain. But when she stood in the kitchen with her voice trembling, her mother cut her off with a flick of her wrist. "It's just money. We'll get it back. You're fine for now. Let your sister enjoy her new life, she deserves it." And just like that, the truth was laid bare. What she deserved didn't matter. What she needed would always come second to what looked good in photos, what made for a pretty Facebook post, what could be bragged about to neighbors over coffee. That night, lying awake in the bedroom she'd been too embarrassed to call her own for years, she stared at the ceiling and felt something shift. The girl who'd always been careful not to rock the boat realized the boat was already sinking, and maybe she'd been the only thing keeping it afloat. They'd used her future like spare change for a postcard fantasy. They'd think she'd forgive them. They'd think she'd swallow it, like always. They'd think wrong. She tried to convince herself for a few days that maybe she'd misunderstood. Maybe there was still money left somewhere, some tucked-away savings account she didn't know about, a fallback plan she hadn't seen. But the pit in her stomach told her the truth before the numbers did. She waited until her sister's honeymoon photos started rolling in, smiling beachside drinks, matching sun hats, sunset boat rides with captions about living our best lives. Her mother liked every single one, commenting under each picture with clapping hands and heart emojis. It would have been funny if it hadn't felt like watching them shovel dirt over her own body while they posed for selfies. Finally, she couldn't stand it anymore. She cornered her parents in the living room one night. Her father was half watching TV, her mother was scrolling on her phone, giggling at some inside joke in the comments. She stood there with her hands balled into fists, the bank statements open on her phone. "Where's the money?" she asked, voice level. She tried so hard to keep it steady. She wasn't a child anymore. She wouldn't let them see her crack. Her mother looked up, one eyebrow raised. "What money?" The surgery fund. You promised it was there. It's gone. Her father glanced at her but said nothing. Her mother let out a tiny scoff, setting her phone aside with a sigh like she was bored already. Oh, for heaven's sake. You'll get your surgery when you really need it. You're managing fine right now. Stop being dramatic. Her father grunted in agreement. We put that money to better use, honey. Your sister deserved a real honeymoon, she's starting her life. You can't expect us to ruin that for her. Besides, he added, like it was the most reasonable thing in the world, you're still young. Plenty of time to save again. It was that last line that did it. Plenty of time. Like she hadn't already sacrificed time. Like her life could stay on hold indefinitely while they played fairy godparents for someone else's perfect Instagram moments. The sting wasn't just that they'd taken it, it was how little they thought of it. Of her. I needed that surgery years ago, she said, the calm in her voice almost scaring her. I put it off because you said you had it handled. Her mother waved her hand like she was shooing a fly. You act like we spent it on ourselves. It was for your sister's happiness. Family comes first. Don't be selfish. Selfish. There it was again, the word they pulled out whenever she dared ask for something they'd promised. She looked around the living room. The same old furniture her grandparents once saved up for, the family portraits on the wall, her father's half-empty whiskey glass sweating on a coaster. None of it felt like hers. Maybe it never had. Her father leaned forward, voice softer now, as if he were trying to be patient. Just work more hours. Do extra shifts. You've always been good at scraping by. You'll be fine, you're stronger than she is. Funny how being stronger meant she always got less. Funny how they could call her a burden when she needed help and a rock when they needed her to stay quiet. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She just stared at them, really looked at them, her parents, the people who'd taught her to be small so her sister's shine would look brighter. You'll be fine, her mother repeated, dismissing her with a flutter of her hand. The conversation was over. In their minds, it always would be. She turned and walked out before they could see the heat rising in her throat. Not because she wanted to hide her tears, but because she didn't have any left. That night, she lay awake replaying every time they'd told her someday. And she finally understood, the only people who'd ever keep their promise to her were the ones who looked back at her in the mirror. They'd used her future to buy a holiday postcard. She'd turn it into something permanent. Something they'd never forget. After that night, she didn't say another word about the money. She knew better than to waste breath asking for it back, they'd already spent it, and guilt wasn't a currency they recognized. So she did what they'd taught her whole life, she stayed quiet. She smiled when her mother told friends at Sunday coffee that the wedding had been such a blessing for the whole family. She nodded when her father joked with the neighbors about how much it had cost but that you can't put a price on memories. She just let them talk. She also listened. And she watched. She noticed things they didn't know she knew, the way her mother always left the file box of important papers half open on the hall table after sorting the bills, the spare key her father kept hidden behind the loose brick by the side porch, the password scribbled on a sticky note taped inside the kitchen cabinet. The tiny secrets people forget when they think you're invisible. Late at night, when they were asleep or out visiting her sister to rehash every detail of the honeymoon, she sat at the kitchen table with her laptop open. The first thing she pulled up was the deed. She'd always assumed the house was in her parents' names, they talked like it was theirs alone, the family legacy they controlled. But the truth sat there in black and white, her grandfather had left it to her. Not to them. To her. She'd been 17 then, too young to handle any of it, so they'd managed it for her until she was ready. She'd never thought to check if they'd made her ready. Turns out they never did. She took photos of every page. Saved copies to 3 different places, her laptop, a cloud drive, a tiny thumb drive she kept tucked under the floorboard in her bedroom. She didn't know exactly what she'd do at first, but she knew that as long as the house was legally hers, she had leverage. The thought steadied her. It made the stale air in that old kitchen feel less suffocating. During the day, she worked more shifts at the small shop she'd clung to for years. She'd built good credit on her own name, one careful step at a time. Now she started making quiet calls during her breaks, the bank, the property lawyer her old coworker had used for his divorce, the real estate agent she'd once designed a flyer for when she was freelancing. No one knew what she was doing. Not her friends, not her coworkers, and certainly not her parents, who breezed in and out of the house each day like they were untouchable. They liked to complain about the pipes needing work, the roof leaking again, but they never asked her what she thought. It had never occurred to them that she had a say. She kept her voice calm, even when her heart slammed against her ribs while talking numbers with the lawyer. Yes, she knew the market was good right now. Yes, she understood what the taxes would be. No, she didn't need her parents' signatures. Yes, the deed was valid, she'd just emailed it over. She started packing what was hers, piece by piece. Small boxes hidden in her closet. Paperwork sorted into folders. Anything she didn't want them to claim as theirs when the time came. Because she knew how they'd react, the same way they always did. First the dismissive laughs, then the insults, then the rage when they realized she wasn't bluffing. She was ready for all of it. Some nights, she still caught herself standing in the hallway, staring at the family photos on the wall. Her parents in their wedding clothes, her sister beaming in her honeymoon snaps on the fridge. And in the corner of every photo, her. Always just outside the center, the afterthought. The girl they could use and then shrug off. She wasn't bitter. She'd spent her life learning how not to be. But she was done playing the obedient child who waited for permission to fix what was broken. The next time they laughed about her managing fine, she'd already be long gone, and so would the roof over their heads. They just didn't know it yet. When her sister announced she and her husband were extending their honeymoon with a little family getaway, she didn't flinch. Her parents were over the moon, bragging about how they'd rented a villa for the happy couple and themselves, a much-needed break after the whirlwind wedding. They didn't ask her if she'd come. Of course they didn't. They just left her with the leaky pipes, the drafty windows, the list of small chores she'd always done to keep the house looking decent. They trusted she'd keep the lights on while they treated themselves. Perfect. The night they left, she watched the taillights disappear down the driveway. For a second, standing in the kitchen that smelled faintly of her mother's cheap perfume, she almost felt sorry for them. Almost. Then she pulled out her folder, the deed, the lawyer's letters, the listing agreement she'd signed in secret 3 days earlier. She'd done her homework. She'd found a buyer who didn't ask nosy questions. A young couple ready to leave the city, thrilled by the idea of an old family home with a yard and a bit of character, good bones, the agent called it. They'd made an offer within a day of seeing it. She hadn't even needed to stage it. She just let them walk through and imagine their future where her family had used up hers. The paperwork moved quickly. When you're the sole legal owner on the deed, there's no one to block you, no one to slow you down with guilt or excuses. She sat across from her lawyer at the local bank, signing the final documents in a crisp, air-conditioned office that smelled like paper and coffee. No shaky hands. No second thoughts. Just the calm certainty of someone who knows the rug pull has finally shifted the power. She used part of the sale proceeds to settle the tiny, quiet debts they'd run up in her name over the years. The small credit card she'd co-signed for her mother when she was 18, closed and paid. The line of credit her father used to float a few expenses for her sister's wedding, done. Every signature, every receipt was a promise to herself, they would never get to do this again. When the wire transfer hit her account, she didn't even feel a rush. It felt deserved. It felt overdue. She packed her room in silence. The childhood keepsakes she'd buried in her closet, the laptop and folders full of her own plans. She boxed up old clothes for donation, leaving behind anything they might whine about later, the cheap old desk, the dented dresser they'd claim they'd gifted her anyway. She didn't need to fight over scraps. By the time the moving truck pulled into the driveway, she'd already left the keys with her lawyer. The couple's agent handled the final walkthrough. She didn't stay for the polite handshake or the posed photo on the porch. She wasn't interested in watching strangers stand where her father used to slam the door in her face. Before she locked up for the last time, she walked from room to room, her footsteps echoing in the hollow, half-empty space. She didn't feel sad. She felt light. The house had always been a promise they dangled, the warm shelter they could take away when she disappointed them, the roof they claimed as theirs when they wanted to remind her who she owed. Now they'd come back from their vacation, tanned and laughing about umbrella drinks and room service, and find the locks changed. No more gaslighting about whose name was on the papers. No more pretending they were doing her favors by letting her stay under this roof. They'd be furious. They'd call her ungrateful. They'd say she'd ruined the family. But the truth was, they'd sold off her future long before she ever signed it away. This wasn't revenge. It was release. Her only regret was that it took her so long to learn what she was worth, and how to make them pay for that lesson themselves. They got back on a Thursday evening, sunburned and smug, hauling suitcases full of cheap souvenirs and new debt. She knew the flight time by heart because she'd watched her mother post a countdown on social media, each photo more nauseating than the last, her father poolside with a drink in hand, her sister showing off yet another piece of jewelry, the new husband beaming like a kid in a candy store. Her mother's captions dripped with lines like "family always comes first." The irony was enough to make her laugh. She wasn't there when they pulled into the driveway. She didn't need to be. The couple who'd bought the house were moving in that day, boxes stacked by the window, the real estate agent's car parked out front. Neighbors peeked through curtains, wondering what the fuss was. She could picture the moment perfectly, her parents standing in the yard, confused at first, then indignant, then furious when the truth clicked into place. The first call came before she'd even unpacked her bag at her new apartment. She let it ring. And ring. And ring. By the fourth missed call, she finally answered. Her father's voice shot through the line like a knife. "What did you do?" She could hear her mother yelling in the background, her sister adding sharp little jabs, but her father was the loudest. Always had been. She held the phone away from her ear for a moment, breathing through the noise. Then she spoke, calm as stone. "I sold it. My house. Remember? The one Grandpa left me?" He sputtered like she'd slapped him. That was our family home. You had no right." She cut him off. I had every right. It was never yours. You used my savings for a honeymoon I didn't take. You spent my money like it was pocket change, so I sold my house before you could do that too. He barked her name like a threat, but she didn't flinch. "How dare you? We took care of you your whole life." "Did you?" she asked quietly. "Or did you take from me every chance you got?" Silence on the other end, except for her mother's voice, shrill now. You've ruined us. Where are we supposed to go? We have nothing." The truth landed with a dull, satisfying thud in her chest. "That's not my problem anymore." Her father's voice lowered, trying to find an edge to twist. Asterisk, you think you're better than us now? Think you're so smart with your little lawyer tricks? She almost laughed. The same girl they once called a burden, the one they said would never make it alone, now the one holding the strings they never saw. I think I'm done letting you take from me, she said. Asterisk, I didn't empty the account. You'll get your share, the part that's legally yours. The rest is mine. That's how it should have been all along. He tried once more, softer this time, a note of pleading wrapped in old, sour pride. Asterisk, we're family. You can't just throw us out like strangers. She almost said, like you did to me? But she didn't need to. They knew. Goodbye, Dad. She ended the call before he could spit more poison down the line. She spent that night in her new apartment, a tiny one-bedroom with no leaky pipes, no old family ghosts hanging over her. The paperwork sat neatly in a folder on her kitchen table, proof that for once, she'd made a promise to herself and kept it. Across town, her parents were scrambling for a motel that would take them for the night. Her sister was probably on the phone with her new husband, whining about how ungrateful she was. Let them. She didn't owe them an explanation. She'd wired them what the lawyer calculated was fair, minus the money they'd spent on her sister's honeymoon, plus a polite invoice for the credit card debt in her name she'd paid off. For the first time in her life, she closed her eyes without wondering who might take something from her while she slept. They'd learn how it felt to be left out in the cold, not by accident, but by their own choices. They'd come back for her forgiveness eventually. They'd try. But they'd knock on a door that didn't belong to them anymore. And she'd be the one on the other side, deciding whether to open it at all. After the calls stopped, after the frantic voicemails turned from fury to pathetic guilt trips, the silence was almost peaceful. She'd worried it might feel empty, waking up alone in her small apartment, but it didn't. She breathed better in these four plain walls than she ever did under that roof that had never really been hers. The first morning she made coffee, she sat by the window and watched the city wake up, no footsteps pacing outside her door, no sideways looks, no passing reminders that she was only good for what she could sacrifice. She thought about her sister's honeymoon photos, how those drinks and sunsets and staged laughter had cost her years of waiting for a promise that was never real. She wasn't waiting anymore. The money she'd taken back, the part they'd laughed about spending behind her back, now sat safe in her own account, untouchable. She made an appointment the same week to see the specialist she'd been putting off for years. The nurse at the clinic didn't look at her like she was wasting anyone's time. She explained every step, the timeline, the cost, the recovery. When she swiped her own card at the front desk, she felt like she was paying off a debt her parents never intended to settle, except this time, the debt was to herself. Her phone still buzzed from time to time. Her mother would call first, soft voice soaked in wounded pride, testing the line, "Can we talk about this? You know you hurt us so much," but when she didn't pick up, the messages got mean again. They'd always been that way, sugar first, poison second. She kept every voicemail just in case, then turned the phone off. She'd built her life around hoping for their approval. She wasn't doing that again. Some days, she drove past the old house, now freshly painted, the yard finally trimmed. The new owners sent her a polite card, thanking her for making the sale so smooth. "We love it here. Feels like it has good bones." She smiled when she read it, because that old place did have good bones, but it was always rotting from the inside out. It needed someone who knew how to tend to things, not drain them dry. She knew her parents were living in a cramped rental on the edge of town, just good enough to say they hadn't lost everything, though everyone knew they had. Word spread. Neighbors asked questions. She didn't bother defending herself when gossip circled back. "Did you hear what she did?" Let them talk. She'd spent too long letting other people write her story in half-truths. One night, her sister showed up at her door unannounced, not to apologize, but to scold her. She stood in the hallway, arms crossed over her designer purse, face tight with the fury of someone used to having it easy. You humiliated them, her sister hissed. Asterisk, do you know what people are saying? Do you feel good about this? She held the door, leaning against it, unbothered. Asterisk, do you feel good about spending my surgery money on hotel suites and margaritas? Her sister flinched but didn't answer. There was nothing to say. For once, her sister looked small, just another greedy child who thought someone else's sacrifice was her birthright. Go home, she said, stepping back into her apartment. Asterisk, your real one. Because this door's not yours to walk through anymore. She shut it before her sister could spit more poison. She felt the click of the lock like the final piece snapping into place. In the weeks that followed, she focused on her recovery plans, her work, her life, her own life. She took long walks in the park when she felt the old bitterness creeping in, letting it burn off in the wind. She reminded herself she didn't have to forgive people who weren't sorry, didn't have to keep calling a place family when it was only ever a cage. For once, every dollar she spent was hers alone. Every step she took was for a future she'd earned, not one she'd been waiting for someone else to hand back. They could keep their empty apologies, their guilt, their excuses. She had what she needed, her health, her freedom, and the simple truth that she'd never again give away the keys to her own life. And that was worth every door she'd had to close to get here.